Okay. How's the sound and the video? Is it good for everybody? Are we in good shape? Good. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I just want to say again that I really appreciate the time that each of you take. I mean, we're all busy. We all have a lot of stuff going on. And I really appreciate the time that you take out of your day, out of your week, out of your life, out of your schedule to invest in your comprehension of homeopathic materia medica. And each time you show up for one of these classes, each time we learn a little more materia medica, it's like one more layer, of comprehension, one more viewpoint, one more capacity to help somebody. And so I just want to say thanks to all of you for showing up, for being here, for doing this. I think it's meaningful. It's meaningful for me, and I'm glad that it's meaningful enough to you guys to show up. Okay, so how many of you are familiar with the matrodonal remedies from Melissa Aslam? Are there anybody here? I see some people here who I know knew Melissa. Back in the day, she's passed now, but early on, this was very much what she saw as her legacy. Oh, some of you have read her work? Yep, good, 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 good. Are any of you guys aware that there was a proving of amniotic fluid that was done in 1927 that Pierre Schmidt published? So we have a long history with this remedy that has, I think, that is evolving with our comprehension of homeopathy and humanity. And I think it has a special place in time right now. And so I'm really glad to be looking at all of this. Would somebody find the link of Melissa Assalam's book about the matrodonal remedies somewhere and put it in the chat? You guys are all so good about supporting me with that. We want to make sure that people have that. Okay. All right. So today, let's talk first just a little bit about what the heck is amniotic fluid. The early proving called it Amnii liqueur, which cracked me up. The later proving is Aqua, amniotica, humana. And they're both the same remedy. They're both made from amniotic fluid. So how does this stuff come into being? Well, when you get pregnant and you got a little bean inside there, there's a placenta that gets formed. And the placenta is like a sponge that sits between the woman's uterus, the inner wall of the uterus, and the little pumpkin that's floating around in there. So the placenta does not actually fully form until about the 16th week of pregnancy. It's not done until that point. It's still growing. It's getting thicker and it's getting bigger. And then it does continue to increase a little bit in circumference because the uterus is increasing until it's about 7 to 8 inches across and about an inch thick, a little over an inch thick. And the growth is appropriate and in proportion to what's happening with that little baby floating on the end of the umbilical cord. The bigger the baby, the bigger the placenta needs to be. And the placenta's weight is usually about 1/6 of the weight of the fetus. So on the mommy side of the placenta, there is a membrane that basically zips that uterine wall with the placenta so that flow of blood and immune response and filtering of excretions and all that kind of stuff can happen. And then on the baby side of the placenta, there is a white covering called the amnion. And the amnion side of the placenta also extends outward as the umbilical cord. Now, the placenta handles all of the respiration, nutrition, excretion. It filters between baby and mama, and it forms a protection barrier against infection. Now, the placenta is also actually an endocrine organ. It's also its own matrodonal remedy. And how many of you have talked with clients who were having babies about getting a remedy made from, having little capsules made or remedies potentized from their own placenta, the freeze-dried placenta from when they gave birth to their baby, and using it as an annual dose for their baby? This is one of the things that Melissa Asselum and a couple of MJ Hannafin, a couple of other old school homeopaths had taught. So that's one of the things that you can think about. The placenta is an endocrine organ, and it's secreting estrogen and progesterone. The estrogen is talking to the pituitary gland saying, hey, we don't need any follicle stimulating hormone around here because we are already busy and we don't want nobody making new eggs. We don't need another pregnancy on top of a pregnancy. So shut it down. And the progesterone is supporting the growth of the uterus and also all the preparation in the breasts for lactation that's to come. So the placenta is serving the functions for the fetus that the kidneys and lungs and intestines are going to have after birth. And remember, we talked about how the placenta is covered by a membrane. It's got the mommy side membrane and it's got the baby side membrane. This membrane extends outward and it makes a little sac, the amniotic sac, makes a little container for the baby. And the amniotic sac is like a water balloon. And from day 12 after conception, this little balloon starts getting filled up. At first, it's just osmosis from the cells around it that are creating fluid. And gradually, that creates many benefits of, we got a little fishy in the fish tank there. The fish tank, which is the amniotic sac, has stable pressure, constant temperature. It allows the fetus to move freely. It allows the umbilical cord to move freely, so nothing's getting kinked. And it cushions everything so that if mom falls on her head, the baby's probably going to be okay. Now, the amniotic fluid up till about the 20th week is pretty much on the part of the mom. She is producing all of that. And then by about the 20th week, some substantial things change. By now, the placenta is full size, and the amniotic fluid becomes more of a team effort. The skin for the fetus begins to keratinize. It has keratin in it that's now sensitive to fluid. And so this is when the baby becomes covered with vernix to protect from being soaking in the amniotic fluid. And the fluid is continually circulated by the fetus. The fetus is inhaling and exhaling the fluid, which is helping to develop the lungs and prepare for eventually breathing air. Interestingly, there are all kinds of issues with breathing that come up in the proving of amniotic fluid. The infant swallows the amniotic fluid and then excretes it, which is helping to develop the kidneys. And that fluid is just going through the infant. Now, the quantity gradually increases to a little over 3 cups by about 34 weeks gestation. For those of you who are in places that do liters and milliliters, it's about 800 milliliters. But then after that, the baby just takes up more room, and there's just not that much room for the fluid. So by the time that the baby is due to be born, right around 40 weeks of gestation, we're down to about 2.5 cups. And the later you go in gestation, sometimes that amount can get much smaller. If the amount is getting smaller and smaller, it can indicate that the placenta is not as functional. It can also tell us that the umbilical cord is not as functional. It can tell us that the baby's kidneys are not as functional. They're not properly excreting. And so when you have women in late pregnancy who either have way too much or way too little amniotic fluid, MJ Hannafin, who was a midwife based in San Francisco and taught some classes there, she always recommended that you get that woman into the bath and you put Nature Mirror 30C or 200C in the bath. And you have that woman soak in adequately warm water. You don't want to get her cold, but you want enough water that her body, her skin, which is the greatest absorption device we have, is right there. Now, there's early on, nobody knew how the amniotic fluid got created. It didn't seem like there was a specific organ that made it. And then we realized, oh, it's osmosis from the placenta, fluid moving into that space that's just getting recirculated. And so what's in there? There's water, there's lymph, there's antibodies, there's all kinds of mineral nutrients, and there's a lot of hormones. So it's an extremely rich area. So let's look at what we know from the provings, and then we're going to do 3 cases. Are we up to date so far? Everybody okay? Questions so far about what amniotic fluid is? We're all on the same page now? Okay. So the first proving was done, it was published in 1927. It was probably done in 1926 by Pierre Schmidt, and there were 7 participants, and they all took 1 dose of 30C, and the amniotic fluid had been withdrawn from a pregnant gal through a puncture, a hypodermic puncture. Their conclusion in that proving, which doesn't have a lot of data around it, was that it's primarily is associated with women and their menstrual periods. Now, I have used it as a regulator of menstrual periods, and I think part of why it works that way is because it is full of hormones. So I think after having played with it based on the information from this first proving, there are more useful ways to work with menstrual periods. So I would hold that data very lightly. What we do know from the early proving that I have found to be very accurate, first one is that there is increased mental activity. These tend to be very industrious people who are working hard with one-sided headaches. And I have used this successfully with really bad migraines that only appear on one side in women who are extremely industrious and who have a lot of problems with their sleep. They don't sleep well. Now, think again about this rich hormonal stew that we've got here, which has melatonin, it has, it has a lot of different things in there that could affect sleep, that could affect mental function, that could affect all kinds of things. So, again, before you read this proving and say, yeah, that makes sense for my client, you would really want to look at amniotic fluid is sort of like a group SAR code. So let's look at an example of how this can come up. Amniotic fluid contains oxytocin. Okay, oxytocin is in everybody's amniotic fluid. It's been measured there many times. And one of the things about oxytocin is that it has a distortion of time. This came out of both clinical observations of people who had been given oxytocin and it came out of approving of oxytocin. So we know that this is true. So one of the things that came out of Melissa Asselum's later proving, which was done in maybe 2005, I think, she found that distortion of time was common for people who needed amniotic fluid. Is this really about the amniotic fluid, or is it maybe about the fact that it contains oxytocin, which has distortion of time? So if we look across the matrodonal remedies of placenta and amniotic fluid and umbilical cord and vernix, a lot of them, I mean, they're all happening in the same place. So we shouldn't be surprised that there is a huge amount of overlap. And all of these remedies are very similar. So you might end up giving one or another because you're seeing it partially this way or that way. So when amniotic fluid comes up as an option for you, let yourself consider, is this really about the amniotic fluid? Could it be placenta? Could it be umbilical cord? Could it be vernix? Because they are all very similar. And I'm going to share with you a few indicators and then ideas that I've developed based on successful cases that I've had. Okay? So Melissa Asselum did a proving in Greece when she was living there, where she had a group of people who came to Lesbos, and the proving was a week long, and they immersed themselves in this experience. And the strongest feature that came out of it was grief, a deep grief that the client felt, the prover felt, when there had been a recent grief for them or trauma in the mother during that person's gestation, or where there is a sibling close to that person who has passed, or the death of a twin. And Melissa published a quite dramatic case of a woman who had found out late in life that she had been born with a twin who had died. And her mother never told her. And she found out after her mother passed away, much, much, much later, her aunt told her. And as soon as this woman heard it, she had a sense of pieces falling into order, that she had always known that there was an other and that that was missing. Now, we see this in a couple of other remedy states. We can see this in some of the minerals that are coming into manifestation. But in this particular state, there is profound, unending grief associated with someone that you are in resonance with. It's not grief about the world in general, grief about the human condition. This is a personal grief about someone you are in resonance with. And this makes it a very common remedy after a miscarriage. When a woman is really broken up after a miscarriage, and you give typical remedies of grief, phosphoric acid, natrum mur, opium for the shock and loss, and they don't really help. If you will give amniotic fluid, like in a 30C, as an inner current, alternate between, if she's flat and seeming like phosphoric acid, give phosphoric acid and then give a dose of amniotic fluid, and then give phosphoric acid and then give amniotic fluid. Use this as an inner current to help women who are not able to get over miscarriage, to help people who can't get over having a sibling die, having a twin die, having some kind of big separation. Okay, now there were two unusual sensations and experiences that came out of Melissa's proving. One of them was the feeling that the person could be in water without breathing, or they could be in water and they were breathing the water and it was just fine. And they will have dreams where they're swimming around in the water and they can breathe in the water and it's just fine. There are also dreams of being enclosed in something. And this also comes out in some of the butterfly remedies where people are, the person will basically describe a pupa, something, a chrysalis that they are in. They'll say, I'm in a tent. I'm zipped up in a sleeping bag. I'm in a water balloon. And these words just come straight out of somebody's mouth. When you hear them describing that experience of the amniotic sac, this should be a remedy that you can either give directly or you can give as an intercurrent for whatever is going on. Another unusual experience that came out of Melissa's proving was this feeling that people have access to knowledge that they have never been taught. They are connected with universal source in some way. They often have very heightened sensitivity, sound, smell, light, which is actually true across all the matrodonal remedies. And they have distortion of time, which is true across several of the matrodonal remedies and definitely part of oxytocin, where time seems longer or shorter. And they also have breathing issues. All of the clients that I've had who have responded well and in a really, truly transformative way to amniotic fluid either had panic attacks where they couldn't breathe or they had some form of asthma. Okay, so those are our basic indicators. Let's go through 3 cases where you're going to get an idea about the resonance and about the usefulness of this remedy. The first case is a woman in her mid-30s. She comes in and she says she feels, just when she's walking around, slightly off balance as if she is floating in the ocean. She knows she's walking down the sidewalk, but she feels like she's floating in the ocean. And she's not afraid at all of drowning. It's not abnormal for her to be in the ocean, but she's kind of helpless in there. She can't really do anything but float along. While she is there, she is hearing the song of the ocean that is telling her all the secrets of the universe. But in her waking mind, talking to me, she can't remember any of them. But as she's going to sleep, she knows she will go back into the ocean and she will know all that the universe knows. So this is basically her presentation that she wants help with. And I ask her a lot of other questions, and she really can't tell me anything else about her. She does not remember very much of the rest of her life. She doesn't really have much awareness of physical symptoms. She really is just in this floating in the ocean place. In cases like this, I think there are times where people have not really gotten out of the amniotic fluid and fully incorporated life. Almost always when I see this, it is because there was a trauma with the mother, either during pregnancy or at the birth. And so I gave this woman amniotic fluid. I had her take 3 doses of 30C over 24 hours. And I made a time to talk to her after 5 days. And I asked her to write down her dreams. When I talked to her after 5 days, she says, I feel like my life has fallen apart completely. I've never been aware of living in my body before. And now I feel it all the time. And it's hard. It's hard to be a human. I don't like this. And so I start asking her, what's hard about it? She said, I feel like my heart is being grabbed and squeezed, and there's like knife points and lasers and needles and swords, and all kinds of things stabbing through my heart. And if I pay attention to it, then I start to cry. And I sob and I sob and I can't stop crying. And I ask her, what are the tears about? And she tells me about her mom who died of a heart attack shortly after she was born. And she never knew her mom. So she did not have really an awareness of this. She was not completely corporeal, and the amniotic fluid helped her to get there. I gave her Cactus grandiflorus, which happens after grief, after disappointed love, the piercing sharp pains in the heart and chest, the fist grasping around her heart. So there are going to be times when amniotic fluid is either an inner current or it opens up the case and brings the person into their physical body where they can describe something. If you go look on H-pathy, there is a case that was published there of a woman who was destabilized by a miscarriage with grief. It's a long winding case where she was given opium and phosphorus and aconite and lycopodium and a lot of other remedies. And finally, in the end, she was given amniotic fluid because of these deep feelings of grief after her miscarriage, where she had become so destabilized. Before then, she was pretty well compensated, and after that, she was not. And one of the things that the author says is that when people are overwhelmed by some experience and the start of a new journey, which happens after you're born, or after your mom dies, or after your husband leaves you, or after your twin dies, or after you have a miscarriage. It's a fundamentally new journey. That those things are places where amniotic fluid can happen. Okay? So the last case is one of a woman whose very close friend had been murdered. It was, this woman was part of a very close-knit community, and this was a hate crime murder. And this client, who had always had a tendency to depression, was no longer able to cope and had a lot of suicidal ideation, overwhelmed, grief beyond measure. And she described it as if she was alone in her bubble, and she kept talking about being in the bubble. Now, this gives us ideas of things like helium, but she described all the grief and described it as if she could cry all the tears that would fill the bubble completely with fluid. So she was given amniotic fluid, 30C, 3 doses over 24 hours. And the first thing that changed was her sense of aloneness. She said she became aware that instead of needing to do everything alone and just by herself, she was able to re-engage with community, which she had completely withdrawn from. Her hypersensitivity to sound, sight, smell reduced greatly. All of that had amped up after the murder. And then she had a dream where there was someone in a nursery, a baby nursery, that talked to her. And she was looking through a window, like through a little baby, in the hospital when they've got all the little babies in their little boxes with, maybe hoods over them or glass over them or plastic or whatever it is that they keep them warm. They're in their little incubating places. And there were these kind, wonderful, loving people who were, she said they weren't angels, but they were angelic. And they were talking to her in a very kind way. And they were letting her know that they were taking care of her precious things. And she realized that one of these women who was there in the space had her placenta and was keeping it safe for her. And it gave her this feeling that she was supported, that she was going to be safe, and that she could have a life that could be normal, that wouldn't just be death and depression for the rest of her life. Now, all of these things are I don't think I know what a constitutional amniotic fluid state is. All of these things that I've talked to you about are either a reactive state that is associated with a death, grief, shock, or it's some kind of state where the person needs to go back to the beginning to unwind their trauma. This is a remedy that you're going to want to think about as an inner current for remedies like opium, like plutonium nitricum, like Diospyros. If you have not yet seen the class that we did last time with Jason Eric Hunicke, where he talked about Aqua Glacialis Antarctica, in that also there was trauma, there was grief, and there was sort of the falling apart. Amniotic fluid is like a much gentler version of that state. That's what we got there, guys. I hope that this information will be helpful for you. You know that now that we've talked about it, for sure, you're going to have an opportunity to use this remedy. Somebody's going to come in with grief, with trauma, with shock, with difficulty in some way. So order it. Now, I've only ever used this in 30C. I know there are people who have it in, a wide variety of potencies, and you could even make up a Homocord remedy if you wanted, but I just use it in 30C, and it's been most successful in my practice, either as a doorway into incarnation or as an inner current. Okay? All right, guys. It's wonderful to see you all here, and I'll look forward to seeing you at another session. Take good care. Bye-bye.